Hello everyone, welcome. Today we're going to dive into a world that often gets misunderstood. A world of towering stone walls, clanging iron gates, and dark, winding corridors that most people think of when they imagine medieval castles. But let me tell you something right away. What you picture is only the surface, a collection of cliches shaped by movies, books, and imagination. The reality was far more complex, far stranger, and at times, far less glamorous than you think. And I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? What hour is it where you are? It's fascinating to think about how this story travels across time zones, across continents, while we explore a past that feels both distant and strangely alive. Castles were not simply fortresses frozen in stone. They were bustling hubs of activity, as alive and chaotic as any city, and yet many of the things you imagine. Grand halls with endless tapestries, knights dueling in shining armor, kings holding elaborate feasts every night. These were not the daily reality. In truth, the average castle day was a mixture of mundane labor, sudden crises, strange customs, and moments of surprisingly ordinary human life. Imagine a stone courtyard filled not with parade-ready knights, but with chickens pecking at scraps, pigs rooting in mud, and children darting between guards while trying to sneak an extra piece of bread. Outside the main keep, women carried water in leather pails, men repaired broken masonry with primitive tools, and servants moved constantly, attending to a hierarchy of needs that often seemed nonsensical but was absolutely crucial for survival. Food, for example, was not the endless banquet that people picture. Meat was scarce and precious, often reserved for the lord and his immediate household, while everyone else relied on bread, beans, porridge, and whatever vegetables could be coaxed from a garden. Hunting was a pastime, but it was also a necessity. Deer, rabbits, and even the occasional fox were trapped, sometimes cooked immediately, sometimes smoked or salted for later. Wine and ale were daily staples because water sources inside castles were often contaminated, and even the strongest soldiers might prefer a jug of beer to risk the water. Spices were coveted, not just for flavor but as status symbols. To taste imported cinnamon or pepper was a mark of prestige, not just culinary preference. And yet, even with all this planning, food could vanish unexpectedly. A single failed harvest, an outbreak of disease among livestock, or even a mismanaged storage cellar could throw the entire castle into disarray, leaving inhabitants scrambling to survive on what little remained. Life was not just about sustenance, though. Castles were centers of commerce, politics, and intrigue. Lords and ladies received messages from distant allies and spies. Traders arrived with rare goods, and sometimes enemies lurked just outside the walls, waiting for a lapse in vigilance. Guards stood watch atop battlements, not in continuous heroic fashion but often bored, freezing, or hungry themselves, shifting posts because the wind blew cold and the rain soaked them through. Soldiers trained, but more often they repaired their own armor, sharpened blades, and argued endlessly about what constituted proper duty. Within the towers, scribes copied letters or kept records, sometimes hiding secrets in plain sight. And in hidden nooks, alchemists or herbalists might experiment quietly, blending potions, concocting remedies, and occasionally producing results that were surprising, sometimes dangerous. Entertainment, too, was strange by modern standards. Lords and ladies enjoyed music, but it was often a communal affair. A lute, a flute, or a small harp, combined with clapping, singing, and storytelling. Minstrels told tales of distant lands, battles, or heroic deeds, but the stories were flexible, changing with each teller, and often laced with humor, exaggeration, and gossip. Board games and dice were common, but they weren't just for fun. They could serve as wagers, a way to practice strategy, or even settle minor disputes. Hunting, falconry, and tournaments were special events, not daily occurrences, and the preparation alone could take weeks, involving not just the combatants but dozens of attendants, cooks, and stable hands, all working in a carefully choreographed chaos that could be ruined by a single misstep. Even the architecture itself tells a story far richer than the image of cold, empty stone. Towers were not just defensive structures, they were homes, storehouses, prisons, and sometimes laboratories. Windows were often narrow slits for arrows, yes, but they also let in light for scribes and children, and in summer, they became perches to watch the surrounding lands, sending messages by flags or lights. Kitchens filled with smoke and the smell of baking bread could stretch across entire wings of the castle, connecting to storage rooms that often doubled as infirmaries or workshops. Some castles even had surprisingly sophisticated water systems, though these were limited by the engineering knowledge of the time, so leaks, overflows, and foul smells were not uncommon, creating challenges that modern viewers would find unimaginable. But the most surprising truth is that castles were not immutable. They changed constantly. Walls were rebuilt, moats deepened, gates reinforced, halls expanded or reduced depending on the whims of rulers, threats from enemies, or shifts in fashion. Rooms that were once private chambers became storerooms, and towers that once housed soldiers could be converted into stables or granaries. Each generation left its mark, layering history within stone, wood, and mortar, producing a palimpsest of human endeavor and survival. And within these walls, ordinary lives continued. Children laughed, arguments erupted over minor slights, servants conspired quietly, and sometimes, in the dead of night, a sudden scream or the creak of a floorboard would remind everyone that danger or intrigue was never far away. You might wonder how people coped with the cold, the hunger, the threat of disease, and the ever-present possibility of attack. Yet humans adapted in fascinating ways. Clothing was layered, homespun, and practical, yet ornamented enough to indicate rank. Herbs and rudimentary medicine attempted to ward off illness, with some remedies surprisingly effective, while others were pure superstition, passed down as tradition. Even the castle's layout reflects this struggle. The careful positioning of kitchens, latrines, wells, and guard posts was intended to maximize survival while maintaining some semblance of comfort and order. And amidst all this, rumor and fear played their part. Tales of ghosts, hidden tunnels, secret treasures, and cursed objects were commonplace, sometimes believed, sometimes exaggerated. Children grew up hearing these stories, whispering them in corridors, while adults used them to reinforce obedience, intimidate enemies, or simply entertain during long nights. The truth of life inside a castle was as much about imagination and perception as it was about stone, steel, and survival. So, as we begin to wander further into this world, think not of castles as distant, fairy tale relics, but as living, breathing entities filled with people trying to carve out their daily existence amid chaos, intrigue, and fleeting beauty. And now, as you imagine these walls and halls stretching endlessly, with their smells, sounds, and hidden dramas, keep in mind that almost everything you think you know about castles is a simplification at best. The real story is far richer, more surprising, and far stranger than the tales most of us grew up believing. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the castle stirred into life with a rhythm that might seem chaotic to an outsider but was actually remarkably organized in its own way. Servants scurried along the stone corridors carrying baskets of bread, jars of ale, and bundles of freshly laundered cloth, their movements choreographed through years of repetition, yet always teetering on the edge of disaster if a single jar spilled or a loose stone sent someone tumbling. The courtyard, which seemed merely a transitional space in so many romanticized images, was in reality a constant hub of activity. Horses stamped and whinnied in the stables, their hooves echoing across the cobblestones. Blacksmiths worked tirelessly at their forges, the rhythmic clang of hammer against metal mingling with the occasional burst of flame from the bellows. And yet even these sounds were punctuated by the laughter of children weaving through the chaos, chasing stray animals, or stealing fruit from unwatched barrels. Meals were prepared with a precision that balanced necessity and hierarchy, yet the conditions were far from glamorous. Kitchens were suffocating with smoke and heat. Huge cauldrons bubbled with stews that could barely stretch to feed dozens of soldiers or servants. The cooks, often women with hands calloused from years of kneading dough and chopping vegetables, added herbs from small gardens to mask the less appetizing flavors of overcooked or spoiled ingredients. Meat was rationed carefully, sometimes boiled into broths that stretched flavor, sometimes roasted when a hunt had been particularly successful. And yet even in these moments, creativity flourished. Stale bread could be transformed into a hearty pottage. A pinch of sage or thyme could make even coarse beans seem luxurious, and each meal reflected not only survival but an artful understanding of what flavors, textures, and aromas could lift morale in a place that could otherwise feel oppressively harsh. Beyond the kitchens, the castle corridors were alive with politics and gossip, often indistinguishable from one another. Lords and ladies exchanged messages not only through scribes but also through subtle gestures, coded words, and fleeting expressions, each interaction potentially shifting alliances or revealing secrets. Servants, intentionally or not, overheard snippets of these conversations, carrying rumors like fire through the halls. Some rumors were harmless, some humorous, and some could ruin careers, incite duels, or provoke vengeance. Every whispered word could ripple outward, affecting everything from who received favors at court to how supplies were distributed in times of scarcity. Even children learned early to pay attention to these subtleties, learning to navigate a world where information was as valuable as gold, and missteps could be dangerous. Work was relentless. Stone walls, while impressive to modern eyes, required constant maintenance. Builders patched cracks, repaired roofs after storms, and reinforced battlements weakened by time or siege. Carpenters carved doors, fitted shutters, and maintained the intricate wooden structures that supported towers and walkways, while masons mixed lime and sand, laboring in conditions far removed from the sanitized workshops of today. Meanwhile, the outer defenses were tested by nature itself. Rainwater seeping into stone, frost cracking walls, and winds threatening the stability of roofs and parapets. Each problem required ingenuity, cooperation, and tireless effort, and failure could have catastrophic consequences if left unattended. Even leisure had a practical dimension. Music, games, and storytelling served not just to entertain but to strengthen social bonds, teach lessons, and subtly reinforce hierarchies. When a minstrel performed, their tale was often carefully chosen to flatter the host, caution against disobedience, or remind listeners of heroic ideals that legitimized authority. Archery competitions or mock battles were not mere sport. They were essential training, sharpening reflexes, testing strategies, and occasionally revealing who could be relied upon in a real conflict. Faltering in these exercises could bring embarrassment or suspicion, while excelling might earn privileges, small rewards, or social leverage that could ripple through the castle hierarchy. Hygiene was another constant concern. though not in the way modern minds expect. Waste disposal relied on garderobes, cesspits, and sometimes ingenious contraptions that allowed runoff to leave the walls without endangering the main living areas. But smells were inevitable, and disease could spread rapidly if precautions failed. Laundry was an arduous task, often performed by the most overworked servants, and clothing was layered for warmth but carefully maintained to signal rank. Hair and beards were trimmed for cleanliness, not fashion, though nobles might employ barbers to display status, and shoes were repaired repeatedly until they could no longer hold together. Even small details of daily life, cleaning hearths, tending fires, sharpening tools, took on an importance magnified by the absence of modern conveniences. Night brought a different rhythm entirely. Torches flickered along stone walls, casting long, dancing shadows, and the air grew thick with the smells of cooking, smoke, and animals settling for rest. Guards patrolled with a mixture of vigilance and fatigue, alert to the faintest sounds yet always conscious of the long hours ahead. Chambers became sanctuaries of warmth and modest comfort, where families huddled together, shared stories, or read by candlelight, while the larger castle seemed to exhale and settle into a cautious calm. And yet, even at night, activity never ceased entirely. Rats scurried through hidden passages, the occasional owl or fox could be glimpsed outside, and rumors, whispered conspiracies, or the distant groan of shifting stone reminded everyone that a castle was never truly silent, never truly safe. In truth, the contrast between expectation and reality was stark. Movies and textbooks would have you believe castles were orderly, majestic, and occasionally serene, but the lived experience was messy, sensory-rich, and unpredictable. A single day could encompass laughter, fear, labor, joy, and tragedy all at once. A failed meal, a collapsed wall, a dispute among servants, an outbreak of illness, a surprise visit from an ally or enemy. All these events could unfold within the same morning, reshaping the daily rhythm in ways both subtle and dramatic. And as the seasons turned, the challenges shifted. Snow and ice in winter, swarms of insects in summer, storms that tore at roofs and walls, and periods of famine or scarcity that tested the resourcefulness and resilience of everyone within the castle. The castles of the Middle Ages were living organisms, fragile yet resilient, chaotic yet structured, oppressive yet occasionally dazzling in the human creativity they contained. And as we walk further into their hidden corners, it becomes clear that understanding a castle requires more than gazing at stone towers or imagining knights on horseback. To understand these structures is to understand the people who inhabited them, their daily struggles, triumphs, routines, and eccentricities. A world where the mundane and the dramatic intertwined seamlessly, where every stone and every meal, every joke and every rumor, contributed to the story of life within walls that were as human as the people who built and lived within them. As the weeks passed, life within the castle settled into patterns that outsiders would never expect. Yet even these patterns were constantly punctuated by surprises, small emergencies, or curious developments that demanded immediate attention. The gardens, often romanticized in paintings as serene spaces of beauty, were in reality a mix of practicality and chaos. Herbs, vegetables, and fruit trees were cultivated meticulously because they were crucial not only for flavoring food but for medicine and preservation. Yet these same gardens were overrun by rabbits, birds, and sometimes pigs that had wandered from the stables, nibbling leaves and roots with impunity. Gardeners, usually peasants or lower-ranking servants, moved like shadows among the rows, carefully pulling weeds, watering beds, and planting seeds according to the seasons, all while keeping one ear tuned to the sounds of the castle, ready to respond to any summons or emergency. Inside, the lords and ladies conducted their routines with a mixture of ceremony, habit, and unpredictability. A morning might begin with the council in the Great Hall, where decisions about land, taxes, and alliances were debated. Yet these meetings were never purely formal. Interruptions were constant. Messengers might arrive breathless, bearing letters sealed with unfamiliar coats of arms, sparking sudden discussions about diplomacy or intrigue. Servants might stumble into the room, carrying trays of wine or bread, awkwardly balancing duties with the danger of spilling precious liquids onto embroidered garments or polished floors. And even as these matters unfolded, children of noble families played quietly, or sometimes noisily, within sight, learning manners, strategy, or the subtle art of observation that would serve them in later life. Entertainment, though seemingly leisurely, often doubled as preparation for real-life challenges. Archery practice was a daily affair for many men and boys, but it wasn't only about honing skills. It was about understanding distance, wind, timing, and the unpredictability of living creatures. Tournaments and mock battles, meanwhile, were grand affairs where tactics, alliances, and prestige collided. Yet the preparation behind the scenes could be exhausting. Armor had to be cleaned and mended, weapons sharpened, horses groomed and fed, and participants drilled until every movement was instinctive. Even the smallest mistake, a buckle left undone, a horse startled, could result in injury, humiliation, or a cascade of problems that would echo through the household. The kitchens were another theater of constant activity and unpredictability. Large cauldrons of pottage simmered over open flames, the air thick with smoke, the aroma masking less appetizing scents of damp stone and animals. But every meal demanded improvisation. If a shipment of salt failed to arrive, meat had to be preserved differently, perhaps smoked or heavily spiced to mask the lack of proper curing. If the harvest was late, bakers stretched bread with grains or legumes that might otherwise be fed to animals. Despite these challenges, the creativity of cooks was remarkable. A handful of herbs, a pinch of dried berries, or a rare imported spice could transform a simple stew into something unexpectedly palatable, boosting morale in a world where comfort was fleeting and scarcity common. Disease and injury were constant threats, yet castles often developed surprising strategies to mitigate them. Infirmaries were small, dimly lit, and filled with a mixture of herbs, poultices, and crude instruments. Illness was understood differently than today. Fever could be blamed on imbalances in humors or divine displeasure, yet practical measures, rest, cleanliness, and careful diet, often proved more effective than superstition. Injuries were frequent, from falls on uneven stone floors, accidents in the kitchens or workshops, or scrapes during training and battles. Surgeons, sometimes itinerant, sometimes permanent, relied on experience, improvisation, and occasionally luck to treat wounds, often without anesthesia, while the suffering of the patient was mitigated more by faith, routine, and the support of attendants than by medicine as we understand it. Castles were also places of secrecy and hidden knowledge. Some rooms contained archives of letters, account books, and records, guarded carefully to protect wealth, alliances, and reputations. Others held hidden chambers or tunnels, either as escape routes, storage, or locations for clandestine meetings. Servants often whispered about these spaces, speculating about treasures, secret passages, or the occasional haunting, blurring the line between rumor and reality. In some castles, alchemists or scholars worked in concealed corners, experimenting with metallurgy, herbs, or early chemistry, creating mixtures that could be both miraculous and dangerous. The presence of such individuals added an additional layer of intrigue and unpredictability to daily life, reminding everyone that a castle was never entirely what it seemed. Social hierarchy was enforced not only through ceremony but through everyday tasks and expectations. Nobles held privileges but were also bound by obligations to their subjects, their allies, and the very structure of the castle itself. Servants knew their roles intimately. Failure to perform tasks could lead to punishment or social disgrace. Yet they also wielded subtle power through their knowledge of routines, secrets, and the movements of more powerful individuals. Children learned these lessons early, observing, participating, and sometimes manipulating situations in ways that adults might overlook, revealing that intelligence and agency were not limited by rank. Life in the castle was, in essence, a continuous negotiation between order and chaos, comfort and danger, power and vulnerability. Every day brought routine and disruption, laughter and fear, accomplishment and failure. The sensory experience was relentless. Smells of cooking, smoke, animals, and waste. Sounds of hammering, shouting, singing, and footsteps. Sights of stone walls, flickering torches, and bustling courtyards. Sensations of cold, damp, heat, and fatigue, but also of warmth, joy, and fleeting luxury. And amid all this, the stories, rumors, and lessons passed from one generation to the next, creating a living narrative as complex and enduring as the stone walls themselves. Castles were not mere relics of warfare or fortification. They were arenas of human endeavor, ingenuity, and resilience. Every task, every ritual, every joke, every fear, and every fleeting pleasure contributed to the ongoing drama that made these structures alive. And as we continue to explore deeper corners, shadowed chambers, and secret spaces, it becomes clear that to understand medieval castles is to understand the very essence of human adaptability. Our ability to create, survive, and find meaning even in environments that seem harsh, chaotic, and unforgiving to modern eyes. As twilight crept across the battlements, the castle seemed to transform. Shadows stretched and shifted along the stone walls, revealing the contours of towers, turrets, and hidden passages in a way that made the familiar suddenly strange. Night was a time of heightened awareness, not just for guards pacing the ramparts, but for every inhabitant, from the lord in his chamber to the smallest child asleep in the servants' quarters. Torches and candles cast flickering light that could deceive the eye, turning corners into imagined threats, and amplifying even the faintest noises into moments of panic or curiosity. Some corridors were so narrow that even the faintest stumble could cause injury, while others twisted unpredictably, forcing visitors to memorize routes carefully, or risk getting lost in what felt like a labyrinth of stone. Evenings were also a time for reflection and socialization, though these moments were often brief and punctuated by interruptions. Nobles might gather to discuss matters of land, politics, or strategy, while the lower-ranking members of the household whispered gossip, shared stories, or quietly observed from the shadows. The line between amusement and danger was thin. A careless word could be overheard by the wrong person, setting off conflicts that might last weeks. At the same time, moments of genuine warmth existed. Shared jokes, small acts of kindness, or the quiet satisfaction of a task completed correctly. The castle, despite its imposing architecture, was full of human contradictions. Authority mixed with dependency, fear mingled with joy, and routine intertwined with chaos. Food, even in the evening, remained a central concern. Large families, soldiers, and servants relied on a steady rotation of simple dishes: pottage, bread, cheese, preserved fruits, and occasional meat. Meals were rarely luxurious, yet preparation involved artistry and foresight. Preservation techniques such as smoking, salting, and drying were essential, yet they required careful monitoring. Spoilage could spread disease or provoke shortages that rippled through the household. Cooks improvised constantly, substituting one ingredient for another, inventing new flavors, or stretching portions to feed as many mouths as possible. And yet, even the most mundane meals were accompanied by conversation, laughter, or debates, making them both sustenance and social glue. While many imagine castles as solely centers of military strength, the arts flourished within these walls in subtle ways. Music and storytelling were omnipresent. Minstrels moved quietly through corridors, recounting tales of faraway lands or heroic deeds, while children and adults alike absorbed lessons of strategy, morality, and culture. Songs could be mournful or celebratory, often tailored to specific audiences, and storytelling was a craft in itself, with narrators carefully weaving intrigue, suspense, and humor to hold listeners' attention. Some tales were exaggerated or entirely fabricated, yet they shaped perceptions, reinforced values, and occasionally influenced decisions in ways more significant than any formal decree. Even beyond entertainment, education was happening in quiet, understated ways. Young nobles learned etiquette, history, languages, and the rudiments of governance, often through observation rather than formal instruction. Servants gained practical knowledge, mastering skills like cooking, cleaning, repairing tools, and understanding the flow of the household. Both groups absorbed lessons from observation of power, wealth, and negotiation, understanding how words, actions, and appearances could alter outcomes in ways that brute force never could. Education, in this sense, was woven into daily life, subtle, immersive, and inseparable from the rhythms of the castle. Yet not all evenings were peaceful. Storms battered walls and roofs, sending torrents of water down stone channels, creating hazards for those below. Lightning occasionally struck tall towers, producing fire or structural damage that required immediate attention. Animals stirred restlessly in stables, their anxiety echoing through halls. Guards had to patrol diligently, scanning for intruders, listening for suspicious noises, and responding to the ever-present possibility of sabotage, theft, or attack. Even a small lapse in attention could prove costly, yet human vigilance was remarkably adaptable, with routines, experience, and communication helping to prevent disaster in an environment full of unpredictable threats. One fascinating aspect often overlooked is how technology, rudimentary by modern standards, played a critical role in castle life. Water systems, for example, could include cisterns, aqueducts, or channels designed to bring fresh water to kitchens and latrines, while simultaneously draining waste away. Devices like pulleys, winches, and simple cranes facilitated the movement of heavy stone blocks, food supplies, or firewood, allowing laborers to manage tasks that would otherwise be nearly impossible. Even locks and keys, though primitive, created security layers, while signaling systems using flags, lights, or sound provided communication across courtyards or neighboring fortifications. These innovations highlight the ingenuity required to maintain life in such an environment and demonstrate how necessity drove creativity in ways that are often ignored in popular depictions of castles. Despite these systems, everyday life was a delicate balance. Conflicts erupted frequently, whether over resources, privileges, or misunderstandings. Disputes among servants could escalate if unchecked, Arguments between nobles could threaten alliances, and even casual remarks could be misinterpreted, leading to prolonged tension. Yet humans adapted, negotiating, compromising, and sometimes manipulating situations to ensure survival and maintain social cohesion. The interplay of authority, dependence, and subtle resistance shaped the rhythms of life as much as architecture, food, or defense mechanisms did. As the moon rose higher, casting a pale, silvery glow over the castle's walls, a different kind of activity took hold. Nights were not merely for sleep or quiet reflection. They were alive with rituals, clandestine meetings, and sometimes celebrations that few outsiders could ever imagine. Occasional feasts were held not only to mark victories or alliances, but to maintain morale among those who lived within the stone walls. These gatherings were strange combinations of necessity and indulgence. Dishes stretched to feed dozens, wine poured in measured quantities, and entertainment ranged from storytelling to music and impromptu performances by talented servants or visiting minstrels. What might seem like a lavish banquet to modern imagination was often a carefully managed display, balancing scarcity, hierarchy, and the subtle art of impressing visitors while keeping everyday operations running smoothly. Even in these moments of celebration, practical concerns never disappeared. Servants moved silently yet urgently, refilling dishes, ensuring the fires remained at the correct temperature, and discreetly addressing problems before they became apparent. Guards kept watch, though in a more relaxed manner, listening for sounds of unrest, drunken arguments, or signs that someone might attempt theft or mischief. Nobles navigated the social intricacies with cautious grace, aware that every gesture, every comment, and even a subtle glance could carry meaning that affected alliances, marriages, or reputations. The interplay of power, leisure, and vigilance created a complex rhythm, one that required constant attention even when the castle appeared outwardly festive. Amid these gatherings, rumors thrived. Stories of secret passageways, hidden treasures, or mysterious visitors circulated quickly, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes entirely fabricated. Children listened with wide eyes, absorbing tales that were part instruction, part entertainment, and part psychological preparation for life within the walls. Adults, meanwhile, often used these stories strategically, reinforcing authority, manipulating perceptions, or simply entertaining themselves during long, arduous nights. In this environment, truth and fiction blurred seamlessly, creating a world where imagination, fear, and curiosity were as powerful as stone or steel. Life in the chambers was equally fascinating. Nobles slept in rooms that were intended to provide comfort and security, yet these spaces were often cramped, drafty, and cold. Canopies and tapestries insulated against chill, while furs offered warmth, but comfort was always relative. Servants and retainers slept in adjacent quarters, their lives dictated by the movements of those above them. Even in private spaces, the dynamics of hierarchy persisted. One could overhear conversations, witness gestures of power, or be called at a moment's notice to attend to sudden needs. Privacy, as we understand it today, was limited. The castle was a collective organism where individual desires were balanced against the needs of the group and the maintenance of authority. Meanwhile, the castle itself continued to shape life in unexpected ways. Towers that seemed purely defensive were also observatories, allowing residents to watch over fields, forests, and distant roads. Moats were not just deterrents for enemies, but sources of water for animals and gardens, and their upkeep required constant attention. Staircases, corridors, and hidden passages facilitated communication, transportation of goods, and sometimes secretive movements. Every architectural decision, from the placement of a latrine to the orientation of a window, reflected a combination of practical need, security concern, and human ingenuity. Interestingly, some spaces held more unusual uses. Certain towers or cellars were repurposed for experiments, storage of rare herbs, or even early attempts at distillation and alchemy. Scholars, alchemists, or herbalists worked in these hidden corners, producing remedies, poisons, or curiosities that fascinated or terrified residents alike. Servants whispered about odd smells, strange lights, or mysterious visitors, and these tales became part of the castle's folklore, merging into the everyday reality in a way that made life unpredictable and thrilling. Weather continued to play a significant role. Storms could turn stone corridors into slippery hazards, flood gardens, and damaged structures, demanding immediate attention. Snow transformed courtyards and battlements into treacherous landscapes, slowing movement but also providing opportunities for creative play or tactical advantage in training exercises. The inhabitants adapted constantly, layering clothing, adjusting routines, and improvising solutions to problems that might seem insurmountable without the experience passed down through generations. Even mundane tasks were layered with complexity. Laundry, for example, was more than cleaning clothes. It was a careful management of resources, water, heat, and manpower. Firewood had to be chopped, transported, and stored efficiently to ensure warmth throughout the long nights. Weapons required daily maintenance, and armor had to be polished, patched, and tested, not only for defense but as symbols of status and preparedness. Each activity, no matter how ordinary, carried consequences for the smooth operation of the castle and the well-being of its inhabitants. Hygiene, often overlooked, was both ritual and practical. Bathing was infrequent for most, yet washing hands, faces, and certain garments was essential to prevent disease. Latrines, while crude, were carefully maintained to avoid contamination of living spaces, and water was rationed and stored strategically. Attention to these details shaped daily routines and often determined who thrived and who struggled within the confined, sometimes oppressive spaces of the castle. Perhaps most compelling, however, was the social fabric that tied every inhabitant together. Alliances were constantly negotiated, trust was fragile, and power dynamics shifted subtly yet persistently. Children learned observation and negotiation. Servants mastered discretion and timing, and nobles honed their ability to balance authority with diplomacy. Every interaction, from a curt command to a whispered compliment, carried potential consequences, creating a living web of relationships that was as intricate as the stonework around them. Morning arrived slowly, filtering through narrow windows and filling corridors with pale light that revealed both the beauty and the wear of the castle. The once dark stone seemed to come alive, showing subtle cracks, moss patches, and the uneven craftsmanship of walls built over decades, sometimes centuries. Servants moved with renewed energy, tending to fires, cleaning floors, and preparing food, while the sounds of life, footsteps, clanging metal, the distant lowing of cattle, returned to fill the courtyards. Yet even as day began, the castle remained unpredictable. Every sound, every movement, could signal an urgent task, a minor disaster, or a rare moment of delight. Breakfast was a modest affair. Bread, porridge, sometimes cheese, and occasionally dried or salted meat composed the bulk of the meal. Yet the preparation and timing were critical. Cooks coordinated with servants to ensure that warm meals reached those who needed them first: the sick, children, or guards just returning from long night watches. Coffee, Tea or other beverages were rare, but ale or wine was sometimes included even in morning meals, partly because water was unreliable and partly as a cultural habit. The interplay of scarcity, necessity, and the desire for comfort shaped each dish, and the creativity of cooks turned even simple ingredients into something sustaining and occasionally remarkable. The castle's work continued in overlapping rhythms. Blacksmiths repaired armor and weapons, often improvising fixes for broken tools or damaged gear. Masons patched walls, reinforced battlements, and ensured that towers remained safe against wind, rain, or potential attack. Gardeners tended herbs, vegetables, and fruit trees, constantly vigilant against pests, disease, and the destructive habits of roaming animals. Meanwhile, apprentices learned under the watchful eyes of experienced craftsmen, absorbing skills that would take years to master. Life was a constant negotiation between labor, survival, and fleeting moments of beauty or leisure, and even the most mundane tasks were infused with complexity and importance. Meanwhile, nobles began their daily routines, which could include overseeing financial accounts, planning trade, managing disputes among subjects, or entertaining visiting dignitaries. These activities required skill, tact, and attention to detail, as a single mistake could damage alliances, spark quarrels, or upset the delicate balance of power within the household. Courtiers and servants observed carefully, learning how gestures, tone, and timing influenced outcomes. Even children were not exempt. They absorbed lessons in negotiation, diplomacy, and strategy, sometimes playing seemingly trivial games that mirrored the intricate realities of adult society. Food procurement was a constant challenge. Hunting parties were dispatched to track deer, rabbits, or wild fowl, while foragers scoured nearby forests for herbs, mushrooms, and other edible plants. Preserving meat required skill, patience, and careful attention to weather and storage conditions. Smokehouses, salted barrels, and dry storage areas were all part of a delicate ecosystem where timing and technique could mean the difference between sustenance and scarcity. Each successful hunt or harvest became a moment of celebration, a temporary relief from the constant demands of survival and work within the castle walls. Education and intellectual pursuits were ongoing yet informal. Young nobles studied history, philosophy, and languages under the guidance of tutors, absorbing lessons that were critical for managing estates, leading soldiers, or engaging with other noble families. Simultaneously, scholars and scribes worked in chambers filled with scrolls, letters, and account books, maintaining records that were both practical and legal, ensuring that disputes over land, inheritance, or obligations could be settled with written proof. The written word, though laborious and slow to produce, wielded immense power, shaping decisions, preserving knowledge, and subtly influencing social hierarchies. Entertainment continued to weave through daily life, though it was never purely recreational. Music, dancing, and storytelling served to reinforce social bonds, teach lessons, and subtly manipulate perception. Minstrels tailored their performances to flatter lords, amuse children, or communicate moral lessons, while games, tournaments, and sparring exercises strengthened physical skill, strategy, and readiness for unexpected conflict. Even laughter and humor had a function, lightening tension, fostering camaraderie, and reinforcing hierarchies in ways both subtle and enduring. Hygiene remained a constant concern. Garderobes, bathhouses, and makeshift washing stations were all part of a system designed to manage waste, minimize disease, and maintain health, though conditions were far from ideal. Clothing was layered, patched, and carefully maintained, and every piece, From the noble's gown to the servant's tunic, served both practical and social purposes. Disease was a constant threat. Small outbreaks could spread rapidly, making vigilance, cleanliness, and careful observation vital for survival. Yet even in the midst of routine, unexpected events intruded. A storm could burst into the courtyard, toppling scaffolding or flooding cellars. A sudden illness could incapacitate key household members. An argument might escalate into physical confrontation or social scandal. The castle's inhabitants adapted constantly, responding to challenges with resourcefulness, ingenuity, and the practiced understanding of human behavior that allowed them to survive in an environment simultaneously rigid, dangerous, and full of opportunity. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect was the constant interplay of life and architecture. Towers, walls, and corridors were more than structures. They were participants in daily life. Narrow staircases channeled movement, hidden rooms created spaces for secrecy, and courtyards balanced utility with social interaction. Each design choice, from the placement of windows to the orientation of kitchens, reflected centuries of accumulated experience, lessons learned from successes, failures, and the unpredictable pressures of weather, politics, and human nature. By mid-morning, the castle courtyard had become a theater of activity unlike any other, where the clamor of labor, chatter, and occasional laughter mixed with the smells of hay, livestock, and simmering meals. Horses snorted and pawed at the ground, their riders inspecting tack or rehearsing maneuvers that might someday prove essential in battle. Young squires practiced under the watchful eyes of older knights, lifting wooden swords, testing armor's weight, and learning to move with precision, while servants carried supplies, water, and messages between the kitchens, workshops, and towers. The pace was relentless, yet it possessed a rhythm, a cadence that only those accustomed to the castle's pulse could fully comprehend. Outsiders might have assumed chaos reigned, but for inhabitants, there was a delicate balance between urgency and order, unpredictability and routine. Even the smallest corners of the castle teemed with life. In the kitchens, cauldrons bubbled and spits turned slowly, while bakers kneaded dough with muscle and patience, their arms aching from repetition, yet guided by experience that made each loaf rise predictably. Smoke curled from chimneys, mingling with the scent of roasting meat and herbs, creating an aroma both comforting and pungent. Cellars were stocked with barrels of ale, wine, and salted meats, arranged meticulously so that retrieval would be efficient. Yet even here small mishaps, a misplaced barrel, a spilled container, could disrupt the careful flow of daily life. Servants worked in nearly constant motion, balancing speed with precision, aware that errors could have consequences far beyond simple inconvenience. Life in the chambers continued in parallel, with lords and ladies attending to duties that were simultaneously ceremonial, political, and practical. Correspondence arrived regularly, letters sealed with wax bearing unfamiliar coats of arms, each one a potential spark for negotiation, alliance, or conflict. Nobles read, dictated responses, and interpreted subtle cues embedded in words, flourishes, or omissions. Observers, often children or servants, absorbed these lessons, learning that influence was rarely exercised through force alone. It was wielded in gestures, tone, and timing as much as in edicts or laws. Even casual remarks could ripple outward, affecting relationships, resource allocation, or social standing. Amid these routines, festivals and celebrations punctuated life with bursts of color, music, and controlled chaos. Seasonal holidays, religious feasts, and commemorations of victories transformed the castle from a place of constant labor into a stage for performance. Tents might be erected in courtyards, temporary stages built, and musicians invited to play lutes, flutes, or drums that echoed across walls and towers. Nobles wore their finest garments, adorned with embroidery, jewels, or furs, while servants coordinated logistics, prepared abundant, but still carefully rationed meals, and ensured that revelry did not spiral into disorder. Competitions of skill, strength, or wit accompanied dances and songs, blending entertainment with subtle lessons in strategy, observation, and social interaction. Even these moments were tempered by the practical realities of life within walls designed for defense. Guards remained vigilant, patrolling elevated walkways, observing festival goers for signs of unrest or accident. Towers, though festive from within, were strategically important vantage points, reminding all that danger, whether from intruders, rival lords, or misfortune, was never far away. Children watched eagerly, some participating in mock battles or games, absorbing lessons of caution, strategy, and social hierarchy alongside enjoyment. The boundaries between play and preparation, leisure and responsibility, were fluid, creating an environment where learning and survival intertwined seamlessly. The gardens, too, saw renewed attention during such occasions. Flowers were trimmed, herbs harvested for ceremonial use, and vegetables arranged to demonstrate abundance and care. Even the placement of decorations, banners, and symbols followed unspoken codes of respect, hierarchy, and symbolism. Servants moved carefully, balancing the aesthetic demands of the feast with the practical needs of ongoing labor, while gardeners subtly integrated pest management, irrigation, and seasonal preparation, ensuring that both beauty and sustenance coexisted in a delicate harmony. Meals during festivals were extravagances by castle standards, yet still constrained by necessity. Large joints of meat, pastries, cheeses, and breads filled tables, often supplemented by fruits, nuts, and imported spices when available. Preparations involved coordination across multiple kitchens, cellars, and storage areas, requiring precision and timing. Food was a centerpiece of social hierarchy. Those at the upper tables dined with abundance, while lower-ranked participants received portions sufficient for sustenance but less impressive, reinforcing social order while simultaneously nourishing every individual present. Even minor errors, a burnt dish, spilled wine, could ripple socially, offering lessons in discretion, adaptation, and resourcefulness. Architecture itself shaped these events. Courtyards funneled movement, narrow hallways directed processions, and elevated platforms provided visual dominance for lords and nobles, simultaneously signaling authority and organizing the flow of people. Hidden staircases, small balconies, and passages offered shortcuts or private observation points, allowing organizers, guards, and curious observers to navigate without disrupting the spectacle. Every structural feature, from drawbridges to parapets, influenced how events unfolded, demonstrating that medieval castles were as much instruments of social engineering as of defense. Even the smallest details mattered. Candles, torches, and braziers were positioned not only for light but for safety, heat, and ambience. Music was orchestrated to reach courtyards without overpowering conversation, and temporary seating or platforms accommodated visitors while minimizing disruption to everyday routines. Servants, apprentices, and laborers moved with practiced efficiency, managing chaos with quiet authority, while nobles and dignitaries performed rituals that reinforced alliances, demonstrated taste, and subtly asserted power. Afternoons brought a shift in energy, subtle yet noticeable, as the castle's rhythm adapted to the heat of the day, the demands of labor, and the changing moods of its inhabitants. Work continued relentlessly, yet there was a fluidity that allowed for both efficiency and improvisation. Blacksmiths hammered tirelessly in the glow of their forges, sparks flying like miniature stars as they shaped iron into tools, nails, and weapons, each strike producing not just utility but rhythm, a pulse that echoed through the stone corridors. Carpenters measured, cut, and fitted beams with precision, their hands coated in sawdust, yet their eyes constantly scanned the room for misalignments or flaws that might compromise the structure. The castle, alive in stone, metal, and wood, demanded constant attention, a living entity whose needs were as varied and capricious as those of the people within it. Beyond the walls, courtyards, and outer gardens were alive with movement. Horses were exercised, their riders practicing maneuvers or games designed to sharpen reflexes and coordination, while dogs chased balls, rabbits, or sometimes each other, providing both amusement and a subtle lesson in observation for the children who ran alongside them. Gardeners adjusted irrigation channels, pruned branches, or replaced fencing, ensuring that the edible and ornamental plants thrived despite pestilence, weather, and the occasional wandering animal. Every task was an intersection of survival, strategy, and artistry. Nothing was ever as simple as it appeared. Education and practice continued alongside labor. Young nobles and apprentices absorbed knowledge not through formal instruction alone, but through observation and participation. A squire might shadow a knight, learning the precise balance of weight, movement, and timing necessary for combat, while a child observing servants or cooks could internalize lessons about resourcefulness, timing, and human behavior. Even games were more than play, they were simulations, subtle training in tactics, diplomacy, and coordination. Storytelling, too, served multiple purposes: entertainment, moral instruction, and reinforcement of social hierarchies, all delivered with an awareness that the lessons embedded within tales could be as important as the tasks performed in reality. Meals remained central, even in the middle of long, busy days. Simple stews, bread, cheese, and seasonal vegetables dominated the menus, yet preparation was meticulous. Ingredients were preserved carefully, combined strategically, and seasoned creatively when possible. Kitchens were intense, almost chaotic environments, where fires blazed, knives chopped, and the aroma of cooking food mingled with smoke and dust. Servants moved in orchestrated patterns, anticipating needs, correcting minor mishaps, and ensuring that sustenance reached those who required it most, whether guards returning from patrols, children at study, or nobles conducting urgent business. Even the smallest error, a burnt loaf, spilled water, could ripple outward, affecting schedules, morale, and social dynamics. Surprises were constant. Storms might surge without warning, sending torrents of water down battlements, flooding low courtyards, and turning walkways into slippery hazards. Animals could behave unpredictably. Horses might bolt, dogs fight, or livestock escape enclosures. Illnesses spread quickly in close quarters, with fever, infection, or digestive trouble prompting sudden quarantines or shifts in routine. The castle's inhabitants adapted constantly, using ingenuity, observation, and communal knowledge to navigate these challenges. What might appear as disorder to outsiders was, in reality, a highly responsive system where every individual, noble, servant, or child played a role in maintaining stability. Even the architecture had its secrets. Hidden chambers, narrow staircases, and concealed tunnels allowed for private communication, escape in emergencies, or secret observation. These spaces were woven into the stone, overlooked by casual visitors but known intimately by those who lived within the walls. Rumors of treasure, hidden passages, or supernatural occurrences circulated constantly, creating a layered reality where fact and fiction intertwined. Children were taught caution and curiosity in equal measure, learning that the castle's corners might hold both danger and discovery. Hygiene and health were daily concerns. Water, drawn from wells or cisterns, was used sparingly and often boiled or filtered with herbs to reduce contamination. Latrines, while basic, were carefully maintained to prevent illness, and clothing was washed, patched, and rotated to balance comfort, cleanliness, and scarcity. Even in leisure, practicalities never vanished. A playful splash in a fountain could become a lesson in caution, and a moment of mischief might require repair, apology, or both. The social hierarchy, omnipresent yet subtle, shaped every interaction. Nobles exercised authority through words, gestures, and expectations, while servants and children navigated these structures with observation, adaptation, and occasional clever manipulation. Disputes, misunderstandings, or rivalries were common, yet the mechanisms of resolution, whether mediated by ritual, authority, or ingenuity, ensured that the ecosystem of the castle remained intact. Even small successes, such as completing a task unnoticed or avoiding conflict, carried satisfaction and reinforced lessons of survival and influence. And amid the routine, moments of wonder appeared unexpectedly. A rare visitor from afar, a traveling performer, or the sudden appearance of a wild animal in the garden could capture attention, spark stories, and temporarily alter the rhythm of daily life. These moments reminded everyone that the castle, though structured and fortified, was subject to forces beyond human control. Weather, wildlife, chance encounters, and that adaptability, creativity, and attentiveness were as critical as strength, authority, or skill. As shadows lengthened and the sun dipped toward the horizon, a subtle shift occurred in the castle's atmosphere. Afternoon energy, purposeful and disciplined, gradually gave way to the unpredictable rhythm of early evening, where duties were still present but the promise of leisure, curiosity, or subtle mischief began to emerge. Courtyards that had been filled with laborers and training squires became quieter, the echo of hooves and footsteps replaced by the rustle of fabric, the murmur of conversation, and the occasional distant clang as late repairs were completed. This transition, almost imperceptible, signaled a change in the castle's energy, a move from structured productivity to a period where stories, intrigue, and observation began to dominate the daily experience. Residents of the castle adjusted naturally. Nobles walked with measured steps through hallways, their eyes scanning for both opportunity and threat. Children, no longer under the immediate watch of instructors or tutors, explored spaces more freely, some testing the limits of rules, others discovering hidden corners, tucked away staircases, or narrow ledges that offered secret vantage points over courtyards below. Servants carried out their final rounds, extinguishing excess torches, ensuring fires were managed safely, and coordinating the distribution of evening meals, all while balancing discretion, speed, and awareness of hierarchy. Even the simplest task demanded attention, as small errors or lapses in judgment could ripple outward in unpredictable ways. Meal preparation in the evening demanded both routine and ingenuity. Fires in the kitchens were carefully tended to provide consistent heat, while ingredients were transformed into dishes designed to satisfy, conserve, and occasionally impress. Bread, cheese, pottage, and roasted meats formed the basis of sustenance. Yet cooks took advantage of available herbs, spices, and preserved foods to create flavor, variety, and subtle displays of skill. Servants navigated the labyrinthine layout of the castle, balancing trays of steaming dishes, avoiding obstacles, and ensuring that each table received its intended portions. The act of dining was both nourishment and social signal. Seating arrangements, the quality of food, and timing reflected status, favor, and authority, embedding lessons in hierarchy within the simple act of sharing a meal. Evenings were also when tales of mystery and superstition permeated the castle. Minstrels, storytellers, or even servants whispered legends of secret passages, hidden treasures, or ghostly apparitions. Some stories were based on observation, others on rumor, yet all served a function: to entertain, caution, and instruct. Children, eyes wide with wonder, listened intently, absorbing lessons about caution, curiosity, and the limits of their environment. Adults, too, engaged with these tales, using them to reinforce authority, instill caution, or manipulate perception. The boundary between reality and fiction was blurred, making life within the castle an intricate interplay of fact, imagination, and strategic storytelling. While many consider castles as purely defensive structures, evening activities revealed another dimension: innovation and experimentation. Hidden workshops, discrete laboratories, and tucked-away chambers were used for tasks ranging from early distillation and alchemical experiments to the creation of musical instruments, artistic pieces, or mechanical devices. Residents who occupied these spaces, whether scholars, alchemists, or clever servants, navigated secrecy, resource limitations, and social expectation, producing work that might influence daily routines, health, or entertainment. The castle was as much a space of intellectual endeavor as it was of survival and defense, a fact often ignored in popular imagination. Entertainment extended beyond storytelling. Music, both instrumental and vocal, filled halls and chambers, its sound carefully controlled to reach intended audiences without overwhelming conversation or activity. Dance practices, mock battles, and skill games allowed young nobles to train subtly, while adults and children engaged in playful or instructive exercises designed to reinforce social bonds, dexterity, and strategic thinking. Even seemingly casual competitions were layered with lessons in observation, timing, and judgment, making play indistinguishable from subtle preparation for challenges both social and physical. The castle's physical environment played a constant, controlling role. Narrow staircases, elevated walkways, hidden balconies, and strategically placed windows guided movement, influenced interactions, and created opportunities for observation or discretion. Secret doors, concealed rooms, and hidden chambers allowed for privacy, escape, or covert monitoring, providing advantages that could be used in both mundane and critical situations. Residents learned quickly which corners offered refuge, which corridors were safest, and which spaces might hide danger or opportunity. Knowledge of the castle's geography became as essential as knowledge of social dynamics or labor expectations. Weather remained an unpredictable partner in evening activities. Sudden storms could drive residents indoors, creating impromptu gatherings around fires, or force urgent repairs to rooftops, drainage, and chimneys. Frost, snow, or intense heat altered routines, challenging laborers, animals, and nobles alike to adapt. Observation, foresight, and adaptability were essential. Those who underestimated the environment often faced discomfort, loss, or missed opportunity. Even a seemingly minor adjustment, like redirecting a drainage channel or reinforcing a balcony, could prevent significant problems, reinforcing lessons in responsibility and attentiveness. Hygiene, light, and comfort continued to require attention. Fires, braziers, and candles illuminated spaces while providing warmth, yet required careful monitoring to avoid accidents. Clothing and bedding were adjusted for temperature, wear, and social presentation, demonstrating the intertwining of practicality, appearance, and hierarchy. Even the act of moving quietly through halls at night carried lessons. Awareness, timing, and understanding of routines were critical to avoid mishaps, embarrassment, or censure. Night fully descended, draping the castle in darkness that was only broken by flickering torches, braziers, and the pale light of the moon glinting off stone walls. The world within transformed. Shadows lengthened into corridors, corners became secret vantage points, and spaces that seemed ordinary by day took on an air of mystery and intrigue. Night was never idle. It brought a heightened awareness, a mixture of caution, curiosity, and opportunity that changed the behavior of every inhabitant. Sounds were amplified. The drip of water, the creak of beams, the whisper of fabric on stone, or the distant call of an owl, all became part of a subtle symphony that demanded attention and shaped decisions. Guards increased their vigilance, walking battlements, patrolling staircases, and listening for anomalies. Their eyes adjusted to dim light, and their ears tuned to subtle differences in movement or sound. Even within private chambers, those responsible for security maintained awareness, prepared to respond to minor disturbances, intruders, or unexpected events. Night blurred boundaries between the ordinary and the extraordinary. A simple rustle could indicate a rat or a fox, a careless squire, or a more serious threat from outside the walls. The unpredictability of night demanded flexibility, quick judgment, and the constant presence of mind that defined survival in the castle. Nighttime routines for nobles and residents were complex. Some retreated to chambers, reviewing correspondence, planning for the next day, or reading by candlelight. Others visited secret rooms, laboratories, or workshops, experimenting with alchemy, mechanical devices, or artistic creations. These activities required discretion, as some practices were frowned upon, potentially dangerous, or intended only for a select few. Shadows provided cover, and the castle's architecture. Hidden staircases, secret doors, and narrow passageways enabled movement that was invisible to the casual observer. Residents quickly learned which spaces offered refuge, which facilitated secret observation, and which were to be avoided altogether. Meals and refreshments in the evening were simpler yet carefully managed. Leftovers from the day were repurposed, preserving both flavor and resources. Hot soups, bread, and small portions of meat or cheese provided nourishment, while wine or ale was served sparingly to prevent overindulgence, particularly among younger nobles or servants. Even these modest moments were infused with lessons in hierarchy, etiquette, and resource management. Who ate first, who served whom, and how food was distributed all reinforced social structure and subtly reminded everyone of their place. Despite the apparent calm, nocturnal life held intrigue and subtle drama. Rumors, whispers, and secret conversations flourished. Tales of hidden passages, spectral figures, or mysterious visitors circulated widely, shaping perception, instilling caution, and occasionally sowing mischief. Young inhabitants listened intently, balancing fear with fascination, curiosity with caution. Adults, meanwhile, leveraged these narratives strategically, reinforcing authority, testing loyalty, or subtly influencing the thoughts and behavior of others. Storytelling at night was never purely entertainment. It was a tool, a lesson, and a reflection of the complex psychology that pervaded castle life. Physical labor continued even in darkness. Night watch rotations required guards, smiths, and laborers to remain alert, maintaining fortifications, repairing damages, or responding to urgent needs. Firewood had to be replenished, water collected, and animals checked, all under limited visibility. Movement demanded coordination and awareness, as a single misstep could cause injury, damage, or delay critical tasks. The castle itself became a partner in activity, shaping paths, limiting options, and influencing behavior, a constant reminder that the built environment was inseparable from daily life. Hygiene at night was pragmatic. Simple washes, careful clothing rotation, and attention to bedding were necessary to reduce the spread of disease and maintain comfort. Even in private spaces, the awareness of hierarchy persisted. Servants prepared chambers for nobles, inspected linens, and ensured that personal belongings were organized, functional, and presentable. Every act, no matter how mundane, was interwoven with considerations of status, efficiency, and survival, reinforcing the lessons that had been absorbed throughout the day. Entertainment, curiosity, and subtle social maneuvering intertwined during the night. Music might drift from one chamber to another. Instruments played quietly to soothe, instruct, or entertain. Small gatherings allowed discussion, strategy, or the sharing of news and gossip. Even a casual conversation could carry hidden meaning, signaling alliances, expressing caution, or subtly testing loyalties. The castle at night became a living chessboard, where every gesture, tone, and movement mattered, and where the consequences of observation or inaction were immediate and tangible. Weather continued to influence life after dark. Wind rattled shutters, rain pattered on rooftops, and frost crept across exposed stone, influencing the placement of fires, the selection of clothing, and the timing of movement through courtyards and corridors. Those who lived in the castle understood that adaptability and anticipation were essential. A sudden storm might turn routine chores into emergency operations, requiring rapid coordination and problem-solving, while providing a test of skill, endurance, and judgment that was as important as any formal training. Night in the castle was also a time for reflection and quiet observation. Nobles considered strategy, social dynamics, or daily achievements, while servants and children learned subtleties of timing, attention, and discretion. Secret routines, whether checking hidden passages, experimenting with skills, or quietly observing interactions, shaped understanding and prepared inhabitants for the challenges ahead. The castle, silent yet alive, reinforced lessons in vigilance, ingenuity, and social intelligence, embedding them into the rhythm of life so seamlessly that residents rarely recognized their influence. Late into the night, the castle seemed to pulse with a life entirely its own, a rhythm dictated not by the sun but by the whispers of its inhabitants, the hum of unseen fires, and the faint groan of ancient stones settling into darkness. While most residents rested or engaged in quiet tasks, others navigated the castle with purpose, slipping through narrow corridors and hidden stairways to tend to responsibilities that were invisible by day. In these hours, secrets moved almost tangibly through the walls. Messages delivered surreptitiously, minor repairs executed silently, and preparations made for the events of the coming day. The castle, for all its formidable appearance, revealed a softer, more intricate network of human ingenuity in the dead of night. Unexpected visitors occasionally disrupted this fragile rhythm. Merchants, messengers, or distant relatives could arrive under cover of darkness, their presence altering plans, routines, and the flow of information. Each arrival was evaluated with scrutiny: who they were, what they wanted, and how their presence could affect alliances, resources, or reputation. Nobles, despite the lateness of the hour, might rise to attend to urgent matters, assessing letters, gifts, or urgent news. Servants guided guests quietly, maintaining the decorum of the household while ensuring that missteps were avoided. Every encounter, brief or extended, carried lessons in perception, negotiation, and the subtleties of human interaction, proving that even the quietest night was never without consequence. Meanwhile, nocturnal routines in the kitchens and workshops persisted with reduced intensity. Fires were tended carefully, pots stirred, and utensils cleaned in preparation for the next day. Apprentices moved cautiously, learning through shadow and experience, while senior staff oversaw the balance between productivity and preservation. The meticulous nature of these tasks was magnified in darkness, where errors could have amplified consequences. A spilled barrel of wine, a slipped knife, or a dropped loaf could create problems that echoed throughout the household. Observation, patience, and dexterity were essential skills, reinforced not through instruction alone, but through repeated practice under challenging conditions. The personal lives of castle residents unfolded quietly yet intriguingly during these hours. Young nobles might engage in secretive conversations, plotting friendly rivalries or alliances, while older residents wrote private reflections, strategies, or letters that could influence far-reaching decisions. Servants, too, had their moments of subtle rebellion or ingenuity, trading information, making minor improvements to their own work conditions, or assisting one another in ways that reinforced camaraderie and subtle social networks. Even the smallest actions had layers of meaning, shaping perception, authority, and influence within a microcosm that was complex, dynamic, and continuously evolving. Entertainment persisted, though it was often subdued. Music could drift from private chambers, soft melodies from a lute, distant notes from a flute, or the quiet hum of a song meant to soothe. Storytelling, in hushed tones, blended legend, rumor, and morality, captivating listeners while reinforcing caution and observation. These nocturnal narratives were rarely simple. They contained lessons about vigilance, human behavior, and the unpredictable nature of both the castle and the world beyond its walls. Children, apprentices, and even adults absorbed these stories, often integrating the lessons into their own understanding of survival, authority, and social strategy. The architecture of the castle played an amplified role at night. Hidden passageways, narrow staircases, and elevated walkways became both tools and hazards. Residents who knew the castle intimately could navigate efficiently, using secret doors to bypass public areas or observe interactions unnoticed. Conversely, unfamiliar visitors or the unwary risked becoming lost, disoriented, or inadvertently exposed. The castle's design was simultaneously a guide, a teacher, and a challenge, embedding lessons about observation, memory, and spatial reasoning into the daily life of its inhabitants. Weather continued to shape nocturnal life. The winds moan along battlements, the rattle of shutters in a sudden storm, or the soft patter of rain against rooftops dictated movement, attire, and vigilance. Frost could form overnight, making staircases slippery and courtyards treacherous, while snow could isolate sections of the castle or obscure hidden paths. Residents adapted instinctively, learning to anticipate patterns, adjust routines, and maintain balance between caution and action. These experiences reinforced a continuous education in environmental awareness and practical problem-solving, deeply intertwined with every aspect of castle life. Health and hygiene, though more difficult at night, remained critical. Water drawn from wells or collected during the day was carefully rationed, used sparingly, and sometimes boiled or filtered to prevent contamination. Clothing, bedding, and personal items were arranged thoughtfully, balancing necessity, comfort, and social expectations. Even minor lapses could lead to discomfort, illness, or social reprimand, embedding an awareness of responsibility and foresight into everyday routines. As the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with soft, pale streaks of pink and gold, the castle stirred once again, though the movements were more tentative than those of full daylight. Night's quiet had left traces, a faint chill in the air, lingering shadows along corridors, and the residual echo of distant footsteps and whispers. But life was beginning to reclaim the stone walls, terraces, and courtyards. Even before the sun fully rose, the castle's rhythm resumed, with subtle adjustments as laborers, guards, and residents prepared for the coming day, blending the lessons of night with the demands of morning. The first stirrings often came from the kitchens. Fires were rekindled with careful attention, coals fanned into life, and water drawn from wells, all performed in near silence to avoid waking those still sleeping. Bakers arrived to knead dough, the smell of flour and yeast soon mingling with the crisp morning air. Small meals, intended for early risers such as guards, messengers, and particularly attentive nobles, were prepared. Bread toasted over embers, pottage gently simmered, and milk drawn from nearby stables for both sustenance and ritual consumption. Efficiency, coordination, and foresight were critical. A poorly timed fire, mismeasured ingredient, or delayed loaf could ripple outward, affecting schedules and morale. Outside, courtyards and gardens began to hum with activity, the rhythm of the castle's heart becoming audible. Horses were fed, stabled, and exercised. Animals for the table and milk were tended to, and courtyards were inspected for debris, hazards, or evidence of nocturnal mischief. Servants moved quickly but deliberately, balancing multiple tasks while remaining aware of who might be observing, whether a noble stepping out to survey the grounds or a child sneaking along hidden paths to witness the work. Even mundane activity carried a social dimension. A gesture, a glance, or a word could affirm hierarchy, indicate favor, or subtly convey disapproval. The nobles emerged more gradually, often bathed, dressed, and groomed with meticulous care. Clothing was selected not just for warmth or comfort, but for social signaling, fabrics, colors, and adornments conveying status, taste, and influence. Some lingered over letters, reviewing correspondence that had arrived during the night, or consulting advisors on matters both mundane and critical. These early hours were a period of reflection, strategy, and subtle preparation, where decisions taken before the sun fully rose could shape events for hours or even days to come. Education and training resumed with renewed vigor. Squires continued their exercises, practicing weapon handling, movement, and coordination, often guided by older knights who imparted lessons not just in technique, but in observation, timing, and adaptability. Children absorbed lessons indirectly, watching servants, observing patterns of work, or engaging in small tasks that reinforced understanding of responsibility, hierarchy, and cause and effect. Even games served multiple purposes: improving skill, assessing aptitude, or subtly teaching patience and strategy. Meals during this pre-dawn and early morning period were modest but purposeful. Bread, cheese, cold meats, and small portions of fruit provided nourishment for those beginning labor or patrols. Hot pottage or broths were favored for guards or workers exposed to the chill, while water and ale were rationed carefully to balance need and scarcity. Food, even in these early hours, reinforced the social hierarchy. Placement, portion size, and timing all communicated status and obligation, reminding participants that the castle's order extended into every moment of daily life. The castle's architecture guided movement subtly but effectively. Narrow hallways funneled residents along preferred paths. Staircases, bridges, and corridors were oriented to minimize conflict, maximize observation, or facilitate efficient work. Hidden doors and secret chambers, often unnoticed during daylight bustle, could be accessed with discretion, allowing for private conversations, early preparations, or observation of ongoing activities. The castle's design was a constant influence, embedding lessons about spatial reasoning, awareness, and strategy into everyday existence. Weather remained a constant, unpredictable partner in the morning. Fog, frost, or sudden breezes affected visibility, temperature, and even sound, forcing adjustments in clothing, movement, and timing. Tasks were often modified to accommodate conditions. Water collection might be slowed by frozen wells, courtyards swept more diligently to remove ice, or animals moved to sheltered areas. Residents learned to read the environment, anticipating challenges and adapting seamlessly, reinforcing a deep connection between observation, survival, and strategic thinking. Morning routines also involved preparation for social and ceremonial obligations. Nobles and staff coordinated schedules, confirmed attendance at meetings, managed household concerns, and reviewed tasks that demanded discretion or precise timing. Even minor errors, a misplaced document, delayed message, or overlooked task, could ripple through the castle's social and operational ecosystem, creating consequences far beyond the immediate moment. Vigilance, anticipation, and memory were essential, ensuring that each resident's actions aligned with the broader rhythm and hierarchy of the castle. By mid-morning, the castle had fully awakened, its pulse steady and deliberate, yet punctuated with bursts of movement, sound, and sudden activity. The interplay of labor, observation, and hierarchy became immediately apparent as courtyards and halls filled with purposeful motion. Blacksmiths continued shaping iron, sparks leaping into the air with each hammer strike, while carpenters measured, sawed, and joined wood with precision, aware that the walls, gates, and towers relied on their skill. The rhythmic hum of daily work coexisted with the unpredictable. A stray animal, a misplaced tool, or a sudden call from a noble demanding immediate attention could interrupt the most carefully laid plans. Life within these walls required flexibility, attentiveness, and the ability to interpret subtle signals, lessons reinforced hour by hour. The castle's inhabitants, both young and old, remained intensely aware of social positioning. Squires shadowed knights, learning not just combat techniques but the subtleties of posture, timing, and speech. Children watched older residents, noting gestures and interactions, absorbing an intuitive understanding of hierarchy and influence. Even servants moved with a careful balance of efficiency and discretion, anticipating needs while avoiding missteps that might draw scorn or complicate relationships. Every glance, gesture, and word could carry meaning far beyond its apparent significance, embedding lessons in social intelligence into the routines of daily life. Meals during this period reflected both sustenance and social order. Lunches, though modest, were meticulously organized. Bread, cheese, seasonal vegetables, and small portions of meat provided energy for laborers, guards, and nobles alike. Kitchens were busy with preparation, fires tended, water boiled, and ingredients measured with care. Timing was critical, as meals were often staggered to align with duties, guard rotations, or training sessions. Those eating first or with more elaborate portions signaled authority and status, reinforcing the subtle yet pervasive lessons of hierarchy that structured the castle's daily rhythm. Amidst labor and sustenance, education remained ever-present. Apprentices observed master craftsmen, copying techniques, correcting errors, and learning the consequences of misjudgment or carelessness. Lessons were often experiential rather than formal. A poorly fitted beam, a misaligned gate, or a burnt loaf became teaching moments, demonstrating the importance of precision, attention, and patience. Similarly, young nobles were instructed in tactics, diplomacy, and coordination through observation, mock skirmishes, and structured games that mirrored the complexities of both social and military life. Play, study, and labor were interwoven into a seamless pattern of skill acquisition, socialization, and survival strategy. Unexpected events punctuated the rhythm of mid-morning. Storms could surge suddenly, forcing hurried adjustments in schedules and movement. Animals sometimes escaped enclosures, sending servants scrambling to restore order. Letters or messengers might arrive with news, altering priorities and prompting immediate consultation or reallocation of resources. Even minor surprises, an unanticipated visitor, a broken tool, or a sudden illness, could ripple across the castle's ecosystem, illustrating the need for constant adaptability and alertness. The castle's architecture continued to influence both action and perception. Narrow corridors funneled movement, hidden doors provided shortcuts or concealment, and towers allowed observation of distant activity, giving residents strategic advantages in monitoring both labor and social dynamics. Knowledge of these spaces was not merely practical but deeply psychological. Understanding which paths allowed discretion, which spaces offered safety, and which corners held potential danger or observation became an ongoing lesson embedded in the daily experience of everyone from servants to nobles. Weather, though calmer than during the night, remained a constant variable. A sudden gust of wind, shifting sunlight, or an unanticipated shower could alter movement, attire, or even the timing of meals and duties. Residents became skilled at anticipating patterns, interpreting subtle environmental cues, and adjusting actions accordingly. This constant interaction with the environment reinforced lessons in observation, timing, and problem-solving, integrating practical knowledge with social and physical demands. Even leisure during mid-morning was functional. Music, storytelling, and games provided mental stimulation, social bonding, and subtle training in observation and strategy. A brief performance by a minstrel could simultaneously entertain, teach, and reinforce social hierarchy, while a game among children could develop dexterity, coordination, and understanding of rules and strategy. Such activities, though seemingly incidental, were tightly woven into the fabric of daily life, serving multiple purposes beyond mere amusement. Health and hygiene remained interwoven with all activity. Water was carefully allocated, clothing adjusted for work and weather, and attention given to minor injuries, fatigue, or illness. Even small lapses could have consequences, reinforcing lessons in foresight, preparation, and responsibility. Residents learned that survival and comfort depended not only on skill and observation but also on continuous care, planning, and attention to the smallest details. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the towers and walls in stark, golden clarity, the castle reached a heightened state of activity, a vibrant interplay of energy, purpose, and observation. Courtyards echoed with the sounds of hammers striking iron, saws biting into wood, and the steady clop of hooves as horses were exercised or guided to stables, while distant voices called instructions, warnings, or observations across open spaces. Every resident, noble, servant, apprentice, or child, navigated a delicate balance between duty, curiosity, and social awareness, constantly negotiating movement, attention, and interaction to align with both expectations and personal objectives. The kitchens operated with precision, a well-oiled machine of preparation and coordination. Fires roared in hearths as cooks and apprentices stirred, kneaded, and measured with meticulous attention, their hands moving almost instinctively. Ingredients were selected not merely for sustenance but for subtle display. Herbs, spices, and preserved foods transformed simple staples into dishes designed to impress or signal competence. Bread rose on counters, savory stews bubbled in cauldrons, and fresh dairy was portioned carefully, ensuring that every meal reflected both practicality and status. Even the smallest act, such as arranging a platter or timing a roast, became a demonstration of skill, observation, and strategic planning. Training and education continued unabated. Squires practiced drills, honing weapon skills, movement, and timing, often under the watchful eyes of experienced knights who not only corrected errors but also imparted subtle lessons in judgment, patience, and anticipation. Young nobles observed, absorbed, and occasionally imitated these routines, learning both technique and the complex social cues that govern behavior. Even play, a seemingly trivial activity, was interwoven with instruction. Games refined dexterity, understanding of rules, and situational awareness, blending leisure seamlessly with preparation for future challenges. Unexpected developments often punctuated the late morning. A visiting messenger could bring urgent news, reshaping priorities instantly. Weather could shift suddenly, prompting adjustments in outdoor labor, protective measures for animals, or the relocation of delicate materials. A minor accident, a dropped hammer, a spilled barrel, a startled animal, might cascade, affecting multiple tasks and demonstrating the importance of attentiveness, quick response, and coordination. Residents learned to anticipate unpredictability, interpreting subtle signs and adjusting seamlessly to maintain order, efficiency, and social harmony. Architecture dictated much of the castle's flow. Narrow corridors channeled movement, strategically placed staircases controlled access, and hidden doors allowed discreet passage for those who knew the layout. Elevated walkways provided observation points, enabling a keen eye to monitor activity across courtyards, kitchens, and chambers. Knowledge of these spaces was invaluable, blending practical navigation with social strategy. Who could move unseen, where observation offered advantage, and which areas were safest or most perilous. The castle itself became a teacher, embedding lessons in spatial intelligence, discretion, and strategic planning into daily routines. Social hierarchy was ever present. Who spoke when, where a noble stood or sat, and the sequence of meal service all reinforced structure. Minor gestures, a bow, a glance, the timing of a response, communicated status, favor, or disapproval, influencing relationships and shaping behavior subtly yet powerfully. Even children and apprentices, often overlooked in formal power structures, absorbed these dynamics through observation, learning the nuanced interplay of authority, respect, and influence that governed every interaction within the walls. Health, comfort, and hygiene continued to shape daily life. Fires and braziers were maintained not only for warmth but for sanitation. Water was carefully rationed and purified when necessary, and clothing and bedding were adjusted to meet both physical needs and social expectations. Residents quickly understood that well-being depended as much on foresight, careful attention, and routine maintenance as on labor, skill, or obedience. Neglect could have consequences far beyond discomfort, affecting social standing, productivity, or even survival. Leisure persisted, though subtly interwoven with instruction and observation. Music, quiet conversation, and minor competitions provided both relaxation and lessons in timing, strategy, and social engagement. Storytelling, especially tales with layered meanings or moral undertones, reinforced vigilance, discernment, and caution. Even the simplest activities, a chess game, a shared song, a jest, functioned as practice in reading social cues, anticipating reactions, and navigating hierarchy. Play and work were inseparable, and life within the castle became a continuous lesson in adaptability, perception, and strategic thinking.